It was early, too early. The kind of morning where grief wakes you before the sun does. At the far edge of the cemetery, near a crooked tree whose roots curled like fingers from the underworld, a man stood kneeling in front of a small headstone, worn, unmarked except for a name etched with shaking hands. Amari Lane, age 7. The man wore a server's uniform, black vest, white shirt, the kind of outfit that says, "I'm here to serve, not be seen." But today, he wasn't clocked in, he was broken open. His body shook with the kind of silent crying only a father knows. One hand clutched a folded paper snowflake, the other gripped the edge of the stone like it might pull him into the ground beside her. This was David Lane, waiter, widower, invisible to most of the world, but not to the man watching from across the street. That man sat in the back seat of a sleek black car, tinted windows, custom leather interior, the kind of ride that whispered wealth without saying a word. Jonathan Greer, billionaire, boardroom legend, master of silence and schedule. He wasn't supposed to be here, but a flat tire the night before had stranded him at a boutique hotel nearby, and now, sipping a custom espresso his driver had fetched him, he found himself staring out the window, at a sight he couldn't look away from, a grown man in a waiter's uniform, crying like a child, in front of a child's grave. No cameras, no drama, just raw humanity bleeding quietly into the morning mist. Something about it disarmed him. Jonathan had buried plenty in his lifetime: partnerships, marriages, even parts of himself, but this felt different. This was love, not failure, unfiltered, unmasked. He lowered his coffee, and for the first time in years, he stepped out of the car without his phone. The grass was wet beneath his $3,000 shoes. The wind bit through his coat. David didn't look up, didn't notice the billionaire standing just yards away, but Jonathan saw everything. The way the man whispered into the stone, the way his shoulders trembled, the way grief had carved caverns into his posture but not into his dignity. And somehow, Jonathan knew, this wasn't just a man mourning his daughter. This was a story the world had never listened to, and he was about to hear it. David didn't flinch when he heard the footsteps, didn't look up, didn't stop whispering to the little stone that held his daughter's name. But Jonathan Greer stood still, just feet behind him, unsure how to bridge a world built on grief and silence. He'd closed billion-dollar deals in seconds, commanded stadiums of shareholders, but now, he couldn't find words for a man on his knees with a paper snowflake in his palm. Finally, David spoke without looking. "You don't have to stand there pretending not to stare." Jonathan blinked. He wasn't used to being seen. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." David rose slowly, brushing the dew off his knees. His eyes were red, but his spine straightened like a man used to carrying more than he ever deserved to. He turned, met Jonathan's gaze head-on. "You're not the first rich man to pass by grief and feel uncomfortable." The words weren't bitter, just true worn, heavy. Jonathan stepped forward. "What's her name?" David hesitated, then held out the snowflake. It was crumpled at the corners, edges uneven, the kind a child folds with their tongue poking out in deep focus. Scrawled, across the center, in purple crayon, "To Daddy, from Amari. She made this for me a week before the accident." Silence. "Said she wanted me to have winter all year long because I worked double shifts and never saw snow with her." Jonathan's throat tightened. "She passed. How long ago?" 2 years. On a Thursday, drunk driver, school crosswalk." Jonathan swallowed. He tried to picture the world this man had walked through since then. How many tables he'd served. How many fake smiles. How many nights, pretending he hadn't buried his whole world under 6 feet of earth and cold sky. David studied him now. "You're not just passing by, are you?" Jonathan shook his head. "I saw you, and something told me to stop." David nodded, as if he already knew. "Funny thing about grief. It's a kind of light, too. It finds who needs to feel it." He tucked the snowflake into his coat pocket like a relic. "You came here to find something, didn't you? Or maybe, lose something." Jonathan looked down. Maybe it was both. He reached into his own pocket, pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything." David didn't take it. "I need you to remember what it felt like to stand here. That's worth more than a card." And then, with the grace of someone who had nothing left to prove, David turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan with nothing in his hand but a world he couldn't unsee. Back in his penthouse suite, Jonathan Greer couldn't sleep. The memory of David, that folded snowflake, those eyes hollowed by love and loss, had burned itself into his thoughts like a brand. He sat at the edge of his bed, still wearing the same coat, coffee gone cold in his hand, and for the first time, in years, he opened his laptop for something not related to profit. He typed, "David Lane, Amari Lane, accident, obituary, drunk driver, December." The results came slowly. A few local newspaper clippings, obituaries buried on page 6. No coverage from major outlets, but one article stopped him cold. Local waiter's daughter dies in school. Crosswalk crash, community rallies around family. He clicked. There was a photo, grainy but unmistakable. David in his server uniform, standing at a candlelight vigil, head bowed, holding a backpack. But what struck Jonathan was what came next. Comments, hundreds of them. From customers, neighbors, teachers. "David tutored my son for free when he was failing math. He fixed the church heater after hours, never took payment. Amari used to hand out paper snowflakes at the nursing home. Said it was so the old people didn't forget magic. Jonathan scrolled faster. This wasn't just grief, it was legacy. Quiet, invisible, unacknowledged greatness. And David had worn it like an apron, serving the world. While it ignored him back, he clicked deeper. Found an old forum post from years ago. A comment from David under a thread about education reform. If I ever get the chance, I'll open a space where kids like Amari, kids who see wonder in everyday things, can build, dream, be heard. They need more than grades, they need someone to notice. Jonathan leaned back. He had built skyscrapers, tech campuses, media empires, but he had never built a space like that. And this man who cried beside a grave before going to refill water glasses for the dinner crowd was dreaming of miracles no one had funded. That did something to Jonathan. It woke up a guilt he didn't know he was sleeping under. The kind that comes not from what you did, but from all the lives you never saw, because they didn't wear suits or speak in investor decks. He clicked one more time, searched the name of the restaurant on David's old uniform, found it, then picked up his phone. Get me the owner of Bellman's Diner. Tonight, sir, it's nearly midnight. Then they'll be surprised I'm still awake. Because Jonathan Greer wasn't trying to offer charity. He was about to walk back into a small-town diner and give a grieving father the world he deserved. Bell Diner sat under a flickering neon sign that hadn't been fully lit in 5 years. The bee buzzed in and out like a tired heartbeat. The door jingled with every guest. But tonight, the bell sounded different, because Jonathan Greer walked in. No cameras, no PR team, no driver waiting outside. Just a billionaire in a long gray coat, trying not to feel like he was trespassing in someone else's reality. The hostess froze. So did the waitress clearing coffee cups. But one man didn't flinch. David Lane. Still in uniform. Still pouring coffee with that same steady hand. He looked up, met Jonathan's eyes, then calmly turned back to the coffee pot. Booth or bar? Jonathan cleared his throat. Wherever you'd sit. David cracked the faintest smile. Then I guess you're sitting at table 9. They sat. 2 men. Worlds apart in wealth. But somehow, breathing the same air. David slid a menu across. You strike me as a black coffee, nothing sweet kind of guy. You'd be right. Most of you are. It wasn't an insult, just an observation. Like a man who's seen power up close, then still had to mop the floor after it left. Jonathan leaned forward. I looked you up, I figured. You didn't just lose a daughter, you built a whole quiet world around her. David nodded. I did. Still do. Jonathan hesitated. Why didn't you ask for help? David laughed, low and tired. Because I'm not a billboard and grief isn't a GoFundMe. Jonathan felt that deep. But you've helped everyone else. I read those comments. You've poured into a whole town. David sipped his own coffee. And I'll keep doing it. That's the work. That's what men do. Jonathan sat back, eyes wide. All his life, he thought power was control, ownership, leverage. But across from him sat a man who had none of that, and yet carried more dignity in one shift than most CEOs did in a quarter. Jonathan reached into his coat. This time, no checkbook. A blueprint. Folded. Simple, but powerful. I want to build something with you in her name. David didn't reach for it, just looked him in the eye. If you want to help, don't do it for her memory. Do it for the kids who are still here, the ones nobody sees. Jonathan slowly nodded. Then let's make them impossible to ignore. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, silent, but this time, not sad. Inside, 2 men sat at table 9, and rewrote the beginning of a legacy. The idea was simple. Build a community hub in the neighborhood where Amari lived. Name it after her. Fill it with light, warmth, and opportunity for the kids. Society never sponsors, but what they wanted to build, that wasn't simple at all. Wanted a place where kids like Amari could code, dance, write, and belong without needing a trust fund or a test score. And so the battle began. The first pushback came from the city. Rezoning will take months. There's concern about parking. Do you have permits for after-hours youth programming? Jonathan had once lobbied Washington to bend tax codes in a weekend. But now, to build one center for children, he was facing a bureaucratic hydra. And that was just the start. Investors began calling, people in his own boardroom. Why are you spending capital on this? It's not scalable. It's a distraction from our core strategy. Jonathan realized painfully that generosity made the powerful uncomfortable. Even charity had to come with optics, metrics, and photo ops. But this was real, David warned him. The world's fine with rich men giving speeches, just not with them giving space. Still, they kept building. When the first shovel hit frozen ground, David brought a folded snowflake. He placed it in the foundation before the concrete was poured. Let her be in the bones, he said. Jonathan just nodded. No words that day. Then the vandalism started. Spray paint on the construction fence. Why them? Build them all. Not a memory. We don't need more welfare museums. But David didn't flinch. He just painted over it. Every morning and every night. Jonathan watched as the blueprint turned into steel. One morning, the crew uncovered something beneath the site. An old copper plaque, rusted, covered in soil. It read, Future home of Grantwood Prep canceled due to lack of community interest. 1967. A broken dream buried in the dirt. Jonathan looked at David. How many things like this never made it out of the ground? Too many, David replied. But this one will. Jonathan finally understood something vital. It's easy to build towers that make money. Harder to build places that make meaning. But when they broke ground for the final wing of the center, dozens of kids showed up to help plant trees. One girl handed David a snowflake. She folded herself. For your daughter, she said. He smiled. For all of you, actually. And in that moment, Jonathan didn't feel like a builder or a billionaire. He felt like a man, finally spending his wealth on what couldn't be bought. The Amari Lane Center opened on the anniversary of her passing. No ribbon cutting, no media circus. Just soft lights, fresh snow, and the sound of kids' laughter echoing in the air. The building stood like a promise. Glass walls, open spaces, rooms filled with color and curiosity, a coding lab with names like Amari's Engine Room, a dance studio called Snowflake Motion, a quiet garden for reading, with wind chimes shaped like stars. David stood by the door, greeting every child by name. He wore his server uniform that day, not out of habit, but to remind himself who he was, and who he'd never stop being. Stayed back. He wasn't interested in press. He just watched. And what he saw shook him more than any financial report ever could. A girl with a stutter reading aloud for the first time. A boy who hadn't spoken in weeks, drawing blueprints for a tree. A shy kid coding a weather app because his mom always missed her bus in the rain. Real genius, unearthed, not purchased. A local principal stopped Jonathan near the art room. What you've done here, this is going to change lives. Jonathan looked over at David. He did this. I just signed checks. No, the principal said. You saw him, and you didn't look away. Those words stuck, because that's what so few people in Johnny's world ever did. They looked through people like David. Past them, over them, never at them, and certainly never long enough to see that buried inside them was the blueprint for a better world. Later that night, when the last child had gone home, David walked Jonathan to a bench outside the center, the same kind of bench where Amari used to fold paper snowflakes. He handed Jonathan one. She would have liked you. Jonathan smiled. She already changed me. They sat in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence means you've finally heard everything that matters. And then David said it. You can go back to your world now. Jonathan looked up. What if this is my world now? David didn't answer. He just stood, walked to the door, and flipped the sign. Open tomorrow. And Jonathan knew. This wasn't just a center. This was a seed, planted in snow, watered by grief, grown by love. And no storm could ever bury it again. It started with a photo. One of the kids from the Amari Lane Center, a 12-year-old named Zion, had taken a picture of David and Jonathan planting a snowflake-shaped flower bed beside the entrance. He posted it on a school blog with the caption, "The man who built the center, and the man who saw him." Within 48 hours, the post went viral. Mainstream outlets picked it up. Billionaire builds center in honor of waiter's daughter. From grief to greatness, the Amari Lane miracle. How a paper snowflake sparked a movement. The attention was electric, but dangerous. Investors call Jonathan's assistant nonstop. You're being emotional. The optics are great, but is it sustainable? We could franchise this idea. Suddenly, the Amari Lane Center wasn't a tribute. It was a product in their eyes. A headline, a trend, a future acquisition. One executive even joked, "Imagine this as a brand, snowflakes on every campus in America." Jonathan sat in that meeting like a man watching vultures pluck feathers off a songbird. It was never about the snowflake, he said. It was about the girl who folded it. But the pressure mounted. Analysts questioned his judgment. Shareholders whispered about votes. Even his lawyer warned, "They're going to push you out of your own company." Jonathan looked out his office window at the skyline he helped build, and felt nothing. No pride, no hunger, just a cold, empty view. A kingdom made of concrete, not connection. That night, he went back to the center. David was still there, mopping floors, humming a song under his breath. Jonathan sat on a bench, head in his hands. They want to turn this into a brand, he muttered. David didn't stop mopping. Then don't let them. They'll take everything. Then give it away before they can. Jonathan looked up. What? David stopped, faced him. Sell your shares? Walk out. Hand the center over to someone who will protect it. Be free. Jonathan had never walked away from anything he built, but maybe he'd never really built the right thing. That night, he drafted the resignation letter, not to escape scandal, not to avoid loss, but to protect something sacred. And the next morning, when news broke that Jonathan Greer had left his empire to focus on community renewal, they called him insane. But the kids at the Amari Lane Center, they just called him Mr. J. Jonathan Greer's resignation shook the financial world. Headlines raged. Greer steps down amid controversy. Billionaire walks away from power over a waiter's daughter. Who is he without his empire? But Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't call a press conference, didn't post a goodbye on social media, didn't cash out quietly and vanish into a private island. He walked straight into the Amari Lane Center, hung his coat beside the front door, and started teaching a class on problem-solving through empathy to 8-year-olds. He became a janitor of joy, A gardener of second chances. The man who once brokered billion-dollar mergers, now fixed 3D printers, ran group hugs, and made sure no child ever felt invisible again. But letting go of the world wasn't easy. Some nights he sat alone, in the reading garden, haunted by what he used to chase. The numbers, the meetings, the hollow applause. Until one day, a girl named Kira, blind since birth, walked up to him and asked, "Why do you always sit alone after the center closes?" He smiled. "I guess I'm still learning how to be a person who's not important." She tilted her head. "You made this whole place? You're more important than anyone." He chuckled. "That's kind of the opposite of the point." She reached out, took his hand, and said something he'd never forget. "You're important, because you don't act like it." That was the moment Jonathan Greer stopped being haunted by his old life, and started living his new one fully. He began writing again, not memos, but letters to children, stories, curriculums, blueprints for other centers not to be branded, but shared freely. In a year, there were 5 Amari-inspired centers across the country. In every one, there was a single rule on the door: if you see someone being ignored, they're your responsibility now. And people followed it, because something had changed. Not just in Jonathan, but in every person who heard the story of a blind girl, a folded snowflake, and the billionaire who finally understood what wealth was for. David still ran the original center. Every morning he'd open the door and say the same thing: "Today is not about fixing the world, it's about seeing it." And every evening before he left, he'd fold a new snowflake and leave it by the garden bench, just in case. Amari was still watching.